Hello, I'm Paul Whitkay, founder and CEO of the Alliance of Chief Executives. Welcome to all the leaders who are joining us today. I'm really excited to welcome you to the second of what will be an ongoing series of Alliance Visionary Leaders Roundtables, in which we will enable leaders from around the world to come together to discuss how innovative leaders are changing how we live and work in ways that none of us can fully understand. First, I'd like to thank two of our esteemed panelists, Mike Burrell and Jim Flatt, for helping us bring together this world-class panel of visionary leaders who will bring a breadth of experience leading diverse companies ranging from early stage disruptive companies to global enterprises, and are all innovating how we grow, process, distribute, and consume our food from our farms to our dinner tables. I am so honored that all these amazing leaders were willing to join us today to share their collective wisdom and individual visions for how the future of food and agriculture will change our lives. I've been asked, why are we doing this? My response is simple. It's because now we can. Over the last 25 years, I've been privileged to get to know CEOs in every industry, and everything we talked about was very confidential and sensitive. There was no way we could share these private conversations. However, when COVID hit 2 years ago, we quickly learned how to use Zoom, and this enabled us to bring leaders from anywhere and everywhere to come together to engage in deeply strategic conversations. We then realized that if we discuss the future, rather than specific confidential opportunities and challenges our own companies are facing, we can invite all leaders to join the conversation and learn how visionary leaders think about the future. Today's roundtable may focus on food and agriculture, but whether we are personally involved in the food industry or not, I believe it applies to all of us. I believe disruptive ideas typically come from learning how other leaders who think differently are transforming their companies, their industries. And so often we can borrow some of these ideas to transform our own industries. As most all of you know, in the past few years, the convergence of so many innovations in areas such as semiconductors, high speed and cloud computing, gene editing, 5G communications, IoT sensors, big data analytics, AI and machine learning, robotics and automation, and so many other new technologies have enabled innovative leaders to transform every aspect of our lives and work. We intend to continue to bring leaders together so we can all gain fresh perspectives and ideas that will enable all of us to move faster and more effectively in an environment where the pace of change is now accelerating at exponential rates. Now let's meet our panelists. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to summarize their extraordinary careers in just 30 to 60 seconds. Mike, why don't you start us off?
Well, happy to. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Mike Burrell. I'm a managing partner in Context Network, a business consultancy focused on agriculture and food, where we work worldwide and offer strategy, management, and insights to our clients. Prior to consulting, I had a career in crop inputs, most recently Sumitomo Chemical and Valent, where I was responsible for North and South America, as well as the global biologicals business, which was originally acquired from Abbott. Before that, I was DuPont, where I had a litany of responsibilities, including managing Europe, Middle East, Africa out of Paris. Before that, Australasia out of Sydney, and you can guess several other things. I'm delighted to be part of this panel and to talk about subjects that are near and dear to my heart. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Jim Collins. And so your careers intersected back there at DuPont. So Jim.
Yeah, Paul, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, Mike left off of his list mentoring some young kid that had just come out of college as he started at DuPont. So Mike, great to see you again. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. I am, as you indicated, the retired CEO of Corteva Agriscience, just recently retired December 31st of this past year. Similar to everybody else here, I've spent 37 years in agriculture, most of that in the manufacturing, sales and marketing, and general management in production agriculture. Maybe more recently, the last 6 years, I led the efforts to merge and integrate Pioneer, Dow, and DuPont to form Corteva, ultimately spinning Corteva in June of 2019 as its CEO. In addition to that, I had experience living and working in Asia Pacific. I also ran our biofuels and biomaterials businesses, as well as our food ingredients business while at DuPont. Specifically, Paul, I'd love to thank you and the organizers. I am really proud to be a part of this distinguished group of panelists. As I said, many that I have either worked for or worked with or collaborated with over a career. So I look forward to today's discussions.
All right, thank you. Jackie, let's go to you in St. Louis.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. Jackie Applegate, and I am the president of Bayer Crop Science North America. Maybe just a little bit, I'll start in reverse to say, was born in a rural community in Ohio, surrounded by corn and soy. Always had a passion, and also my family had a restaurant business. So food has been the center of my world. Went on to get a PhD in organic chemistry, and right out of getting my PhD, I went into Bayer and started my 30-year career with Bayer, and started out in basically in production, and then went on to a global career where I've worked in anywhere from development to managing our global portfolio and pipeline, to also then going into marketing and portfolio management and in-licensing and out-licensing of technologies. And then, went on to become a business leader in the organization. And I've managed businesses across the globe. 67% of my career, I've worked abroad within the Bayer organization. And it's been really fascinating. I've managed this business and in the crop protection industry, also in the non-crop industry, which is golf, pest control, serving an entire different industry within that value chain, and then also the vegetable seeds business. And I've been leading the North American crop science business for over a year. Maybe just a little bit about Bayer. Bayer is a life sciences company whose purpose is about science for a better life, and fundamentally delivering on a vision of health for all and hunger for none. So a little bit about me, and I really look forward to this today. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to someone that's I'm told is more the disruptor. So Wade, you're up in and where are you at this morning at minus what, 41 you said?
Minus 43 Celsius here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So yeah, thanks for having me here today, Paul. Yeah, my name's Wade Barnes. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Farmer's Edge. We're a digital agriculture company. My roots are to the farm. Grew up on a family farm here in Western Manitoba. I like to brag that I'm probably one of the only ag tech CEOs that's had his arm in the wrong end of a cow before. So know all about the farm, still farm with my family. My roots were agronomy, worked as an agronomist throughout the retail space, got some exposure to technology early on in my ag career, got hooked on that, and then, I was working for a retail and started to develop a internal kind of concept around variable rate applications. And, I always like to tell people that we increased yields and reduced fertilizer. At the time, my boss, who was in the business of selling fertilizer, thought that was a career limiting move and said, "Hey kid, you get paid to sell fertilizer, but you're selling a lot less." And from there, I moved on, started Farmer's Edge, typical startup, working out of the basement of my house with a $30,000 loan and $20,000 of savings and enough money to kind of get through the first year. And from there, Farmer's Edge grew, got really focused around data, and really believed the fact that really intensive data in a field could really change agriculture. And from there, we've grown, raised about $300 million, which at the time for a farm kid from Manitoba seemed like an unbelievable amount of money. Learned a lot about how to do that, and Lucky enough, we did an IPO here, one of the first ag tech groups to do an IPO last March, was really successful. We've had a bit of a tough go the last year. Learning how to be a public company CEO is not as fun as what I probably would have thought it was. So there's good times and bad times, but see a huge opportunity around what digital is going to do for agriculture as we look at what's the decarbonization of ag, traceability, how data is going to solve big problems. So we just want to be a big part of that. So excited to be on the panel. Some really smart people. Hopefully this farm kid from Manitoba can contribute in any way I can. So thank you.
Well, welcome. And I think I saw Jim Collins smile when you said something about the challenges of running a public company. So thank you. Let's stay on the disruption side and data. Jim Flatt.
Morton Paul, and thanks for the invitation to participate. This is a topic that I've been really passionate about for since early in my career. I currently have co-founded and lead a biotechnology company, Brightseed, located here in the sunny Bay Area, a little warmer, Wade here, so I won't make you jealous. We are a company devoted to improving health through the discovery and commercialization of novel plant bioactives that the plant produces for its own growth and survival, but which have important health benefits. And we do this through a fairly powerful AI-based system that we developed to identify these compounds, intuit their function, and then translate that to products in a very short period of time. My background's been in 35 years in applied biotechnology, most of that focused in food and nutrition. I led R&D at Martech Biosciences, as pioneer of DHA omega-3 for brain and eye development. It's pretty much a gold standard for those products, and increasingly found in a number of toddler foods and plant-based foods, and worked with Craig Venner, the human genome pioneer, at an early synthetic biology company, Synthetic Genomics, as chief technology officer. So really got exposed to a lot of really big vision and leading technologies, but started my experience with agriculture. My fun fact, picking apricots over 2 summers here in the Santa Clara Valley. Unfortunately, you can't find, I think, an apricot tree, much less an orchard, but at least there was a day when this was a fairly agricultural place.
So, all right, well, thank you. Jagveer, let's go to up to Toronto.
Hi, everyone. Again, really lucky to be here and excited to talk about the future of food and agriculture. Jagveer Randhawa, I'm the CEO of Compass Digital Labs, who is part of Compass Group North America. Compass Group, a little bit of a company, is one of the largest food and support services companies in the world, one of the largest private sector employers in North America. And what we do is feed a lot of people every day in offices, schools, hospitals, and probably some of your offices. What the last 10 years has been for me has been joining Compass Group from a telecom and technology development career previously. And it's an entrepreneurial story. The food business, as Wade said, is getting very technology centric. We've seen an acceleration over the last 2 years, and what CDL, or Compass Digital Labs, does is we are the digital and innovation arm to drive growth efficiency throughout Compass Group for both the US and Canada. So super exciting time. Our organization grew from 2 people, which was me and the CTO when we joined, to now 450 people that drive digital and innovation. And the latest creation of ours is we just launched a corporate venture capital that is now making investments in food tech, food automation, and startups. So very exciting time for us, and really excited to speak to you all today.
Cool, thank you. And Rob, you get the back clean up here. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to take part and participate with this audience. It's a great event you've pulled off here. So just by way of background, I'm a partner with Ernst & Young, EY, and I lead our food and ag sector across the Americas and play the same role globally. So I've got this great, I feel like I got the dream job. I get to see, both the large corporates on a global basis, what they're challenged with. And at the same time, I get to work with the investment community, whether that's private equity or venture capital or startups, and how they're growing those companies and turning them into the next large company. So it's a real pleasure to take part. Similar to Jackie, I grew up in a small town in Illinois, maybe not as small as Jackie's, but surrounded by corn and soy. So I've been around it for a long time. Went on, got an ag econ focused major, and then now reside in Nashville, Tennessee. So again, really fortunate to take part and hopefully bring our view of the food system, where we get to work with everybody on the input side, all the way down to restaurants and grocery and everybody else who supports this, pretty complex food system at the end of the day. So thanks again.
All right. Well, thank you. And Jim Collins, since you're the retired one here with lots of time on your hands, you probably had more time to reflect on the future than some of these folks that are in the trenches every day. So why don't you kick us off? And it's an impossible task to describe the future in 3 minutes or less, but start us off.
Great, thanks, Paul. And I'm not sure I'm worthy of the leadoff spot, but I appreciate that. I did spend some time thinking about the question, as we look toward the future, what are the 2 or 3 major areas that you believe are going to shape the view of that future? And I really came up with three buckets that I'll talk about. One is a term called precision, and I'll expand on that. The second one will be around genetics and has a lot to do with my connection and past experience. And then the third is something I'll just generally label as climate, and I'll build that out. So, first on precision, I think there's a lot of talk about data and data analytics and AI and all of that, and we hear it every day in agriculture. But the real trend, the real shift in ag will come from the use of a lot of things: the use of engineering and new equipment, the use of photometry and the ability to study and analyze different wavelengths, the use of all of that data that we talk about to just be more precise in agriculture. Whether that's precision in how we apply inputs, precision in how we control weeds and diseases, precision in how we harvest, and just more precision. And so it's why I think about a generation that's coming, the training that we're hopefully providing, is that we're beginning to integrate all of that together to just be more precise in ag. And society is demanding that. Farmers, economically will benefit from it, and clearly as we go forward, I see that as a big area. Second, I'll call it genetics. And, I think we talked a little bit about some of the past companies around biotechnology. Clearly, my own company was a big part of that. But unfortunately, the promise of biotech really stopped with a few crops. We really never took it well beyond that. So I think the real explosion that's coming is new technologies like CRISPR. We've talked about that, will unlock and open up a more precise application of this technology, an opportunity to work in crops that can really change not only the nutrition of the world, but the productivity of the world. And the reason I believe that technology will now be more acceptable is, first, I'm not talking about transgenetics. I'm talking about either upregulating or downregulating stuff that Mother Nature already put there. Second, I'm talking about the opportunity to use these technologies to do more good for the planet. And that's the pull that's coming, is society will open up and say, oh, it's a GMO, but geez, I'm helping to save the planet. Why not be more open to the application of these technologies? So it's those two trends that I think are going to create a unique backdrop that will allow a next generation. There's some great, really much smarter than I folks on this call here that I know will probably expand on that. And then third, I'll talk about climate. Clearly agriculture has been in the crosshairs from a climate perspective as being the problem, right? Being part of the issue with carbon emissions, with methane, all of the above, and vilified at times. So back in 2018, I was the keynote speaker at the World Food Prize, and we had this idea of kind of a new push where we would move agriculture from being the problem to be able to talk about ag as the solution. And I coined a phrase. I called it climate positive agriculture. It wasn't perfect. It didn't really stick. It was confusing to folks. Now we talk about it as regenerative agriculture. It's really the opportunity to think about that field, that farm operation in a 365-day view, and begin to put the farmer in the role of not only compensating them for that, but put them in the role of helping to solve these climate issues, as opposed to being viewed as part of the issue. So I think it comes down to those three areas, from the kind of company that I was a part of, and from the view that I have. Clearly, those aren't the only three trends that are out there. I'll add just a final corollary around biologics. Biologics are going to be important in the future, and so I'm going to make it subpoint 2A under genetics. It's the new genetic tools now that will allow us to use a biological that we've discovered that Mother Nature has optimized for hundreds or thousands of years in one crop and in one microcosm, climate and soil pH arena. In the past, we tried to take that biologic and apply it to other crops and other geographies, and the technology just wasn't so robust. Now we can take what Mother Nature has engineered and use these new genetic tools to upgrade it so it can work in these other areas. A little bit further out than the horizon that I think you talked about, but still part of that whole genetics. So precision, genetics, and climate are the three areas that I think are going to really shift in this coming horizon.
All right, thanks for great starts. And I can't help but observe that our first Visionary Leaders Roundtable was last week, when we brought amazing leaders in health and healthcare together. And pretty much it's exact same tools and topics: precision medicine, genetics. We had the first CEO of one of the first, Jennifer Doudna's first CRISPR technology company, and sustainability. So the same issues are going across virtually every sector. So Wade, let's go to you. It's how do you see the future?
I see it a lot of similarities to how Jim views it as well. I mean, I think the future is going to be focused around, essentially how farmers do business, and farmers are no different than any other consumer, and they're becoming digitalized. And, so any young farm family, you can quickly look in your living room and you've got 4 kids on iPads and iPhones. And so if you look 10 years down the line, those kids are going to be the ones that are going to be making farming decisions. And so, technology is not foreign to them, and their expectations of how they've gone out and bought, running shoes will be how they're going to go out and buy glyphosate in the future. So I also think that, a critical element going forward is going to be around, low carbon grain. I think the decarbonization of agriculture is it's coming like a freight train. And for food companies, renewables, 40% of their emissions are connected to the grain that they buy at the farm. And so there's going to be a huge expectation of being able to have that type of transparency of what, how much energy has been used on that farm to produce a bushel of wheat or a bushel of corn. And, the other part of it that I see is around, risk management and financial services. I think, North American agriculture has done really well based on the fact that there's been a safety net built in by the governments in order to protect farmers around risk. I think one of the things, and I have to be careful because I'm a Western Canadian farm guy, that the climate seems more volatile. And what you've seen is record high crop prices, record high crop input prices leads to a lot of risk. And I'll even go back, record high land rent and land costs. Never mind equipment costs. So there's a lot of risk on the farms. I think as you move forward, the risk management that's in place probably doesn't cut it anymore. And if you look beyond that, if you look at markets like Brazil or emerging markets, there really isn't any type of government type insurance. And so a lot of those markets have really sort of had to grow without having backing. And I always say that, I mean, if I walked into my banker without crop insurance, he'd laugh at me and tell me to leave, you know, but yet many Brazilian farmers go in, they don't have financing, they don't have crop insurance in order to get financing. And so how I think this all kind of converges is that, you know, the digitalization of the farm, that connected farm is going to be critical to solving a lot of these problems. I mean, number one, when you think about the decarbonization of ag, if food companies and renewables have to have low carbon grain, that means they need to track and trace everything that's going on in the farm. How are you going to do that? I mean, you know, if the onus is left on the farmer to log all this information with a pen and a notebook, that's not going to happen. It's going to have to be passive, but it's going to have to be extremely credible going forward. And once you create that digital infrastructure on the farm, you know, and help companies with their scope 3 emissions, suddenly now you've changed the landscape. You have that digital infrastructure. Now farmers can use that to get better insurance, better financing, and probably the number one thing, and I think this is the first time in history, and this probably scares lots of people in the industry, but because of technology, the farmer can have a connection to the consumer. That's never really happened before. And as we look 5-10 years out, the ability for the consumer to have connectivity to the people that are actually growing the food, rather than the connectivity is to the food company or the grain company, it's going to be actually to the farmer. And I think that, you know, and farmers like to say, well, I'm not really good at this technology side, as they're looking on their cell phone doing a digital grain contract. They are pretty technically advanced. They just don't want to admit it. And it's happening really fast. And so I think in the future, you know, the power of digital is going to empower the grower. It's going to be sort of a real leveling factor. And I think that, you know, the intelligence that a lot of old industries had for a long, long time that's gave them an advantage in the industry is going to shift, because that intelligence now will actually go back to the grower. And so, and the ability, when you think about, you know, the insurance industry, for a reinsurance company that generally has to work with a primary insurance company that generally works with brokers and agents to get to a grower, could have a direct relationship with a 3,000 acre farmer in Iowa. I mean, that is real and that's happening. But again, I think that the connectivity on the farm, not just in North America, but around the globe, is going to be critical. And once, and I think that if you look 10 years out, that's going to be the norm. So I'm super excited about that. I think that you know, farmers like to say that technology scares them. I don't agree with them. They're far more technically savvy than they let on, and they're going to be that much more savvy in 10 years from now, because those kids that are on those iPhones, they're going to be making the decisions on the farm. They might not be driving a tractor might be driving itself, but they're going to be using technology, data, and information to make critical decisions. And I think it's super exciting for agriculture. And, you know, back to Jim's point that, you know, agriculture has been thought of as the villain in climate change. And I actually think that technology is going to showcase that they're actually the heroes, that people don't realize that at $1 a pound nitrogen, farmers aren't going out of their way to over apply nitrogen in fields. They just aren't telling their story. But when you can have data and information backing up all these great decisions that they make, then suddenly now I think it'll change the public's perception. So Farmers Edge just hoping to be a part of that. I think this is a rocket ship and for technology across the entire agriculture space. So I think it's really exciting times.
All right. Thank you, Wade. Thank you. Jackie, let's go to you.
Okay, great. You know, fascinating, because you know, listening to Jim and Wade, I think we're very well aligned. So I think what I'll do is try to build, you know, fundamentally, I think in, you know, everything we do in Bayer, you know, the customer is the center of, and that's the farmer, and working, of course, with our retail partners. And, you know, I mean, ag, you know, farming has been under pressure, but I think, you know, just to start, I think, you know, really also the pandemic really brought to the forefront a lot of disruption, and showing the importance of, labor resourcing. And we've had a lot of supply chain disruptions in the end. How can farmers get their, if you're in horticulture, how can you get your food on the market in time with the disruption? And then, fundamentally, the disruption, with restaurants closing and hospitals, and increased commodity prices. And so the value chain, I think, has really been disrupted, and it's made us want to all step back. I think also really, if you look at from a governmental perspective, globally, with COP26, a lot of strong alignment around sustainability measures. And an evolving regulatory landscape that was also putting an emphasis on the environment. So it's also really important that we keep in mind the job the farmers have to do and how we're going to help them. And I think that really goes to me around these three pillars, which I consider to be innovation, also this whole digital transformation of our industry, and also sustainability. And to build, I think what Jim said, absolutely spot on, Jim. The whole thing, if I look at the platforms that we as crop science deal with, and then that's if it's in breeding and biotech, and you went into the whole perspective of genetics, with CRISPR-Cas and everything. I think you're definitely going to be able to see that development in different types of crops and elements that you stress. So just not on input traits that help farmers be better, but that positive societal perspective of output traits and elements. And it just opens up the world in ag to allow us to develop differently. Also, crop protection and biologics are really essential, and there is a big forefront of push in biology that looks different today. Which allows us also to develop uniqueness of modes of action, and also formulations that allow us to use it in a more precision application, which has then a positive attribute environmentally, which Jim talked about, that whole perspective of that precision ag and that societal expectation. And then what I would say is that also building on Wade's perspective about digitalization, I think that from a digital perspective today, that it is really about risk management and what digital brings, and the data that we're able to collect today from on farm, and then within each of our businesses and industries of how we work today, is really going to allow farmers to take that data and to be able to make better decisions in how they're addressing their farm management needs, and if that's in, selecting, from a precision perspective, the seed they need, based on the soil types and the temperatures and their weather conditions, and I'm talking about this from a global perspective, because we have that ability and understanding today to be able to, identify proactively, a disease or insect infestation coming, so they can precision spray proactively. These type of elements, also using data then to evaluate the amount of nitrogen in the water that they're using. So all of this allows really, to increase safety profiles, reduce crop protection, volumes. And then when you think about the word that, that precision ag, it's about application. So, as we think about technologies and mechanization of, drone technology, remote sensing, utilization of satellite imagery, digital irrigation, all these things are doing all the right things to reduce emissions, conserve water, and and fundamentally just improve yields. And it's an exciting time. I mean, there's just such a pivot. And then if you really go back to this whole element of sustainability, climate change is something that we see as this reality. And the one thing I always say is, farming, and I always say farmers, no matter where you're on the world, they're just the salt of the earth. I mean, just fantastic. It is resource intensive, and they're the best stewards of the land. And I build on your point, Wade, of getting them accolades. And I would just say that, we've just seen also such a climate change impact with the erratic weather behavior, extreme weather. I mean, just look at Canada last year. I ran the Australian New Zealand business for years, and just the impact of weather there and water management, they have to be, from their farm management practices, planning so succinctly and managing their business. So I really also feel that, the development of further solutions that'll help and standability of crops and droughts. Also, as I discussed, the better water management will be essential. Also, not only on farm, but our responsibility as an industry to reduce our own carbon footprint, and how we think about that as we're developing solutions and new farming practices is really going to be essential. And, I would just say, to build on the whole perspective of carbon initiative, this is definitely, if you think about on farm, their carbon impact, if we look at this globally, there's an embracing of carbon. And also, farmers have been doing no-till farming for years, but also, precision applications with nitrogen elements, and this, utilizing of cover crops. I mean, I really think it's essential. And fundamentally, in the end, something else I want to stress is, I think when we look at the global concerns that we have to address today in agriculture, we have to collaborate and work together. And I think that is such an opportunity. And I think, Paul, you well established it just by looking at this panel, as you said, about, those that are venturing into new areas versus established companies. But I really think with the capabilities and the investment we see in ag also today, I really think, we have a bright future. And I think by us working together to build on our collective insights and the talents across these various, platforms, and understanding better, the needs of the farmer from a customer-centric perspective, but also, going back, to perspective of the consumer, because the consumer today is interested in how and where their food's produced, and they vote, with their buying power. We have to bring that all together. But I really feel if we're engaging partners while we're investing in developing the new technologies, bringing in that perspective, the farmer and the consumer, we'll all be able, to create a world that we're protecting the environment, and at the same time we're delivering the needs of what consumers want, but we're allowing farmers to grow better and healthy and more nutritious food in a sustainable manner.
Thank you. So, Rob, what do you see differently?
No, I think there's a few elements to think about, right? So first off, I think the system of the future, and we can say, is that 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? But I think it's consumer driven. If you're a farmer, you want to know where the future is going, go look at consumers and see where they're heading. I think this shift where we're going to start pulling food through the system versus pushing it from production all the way through, is a big piece. If you just think about the sheer fact of consumers never asked to put corn in their gas tank, but we did it, and it was a great thing. It was a great innovation, but now we have to be more responsive to consumers. So I think that's a big element. So what do consumers want? They want fresh, local, transparent. They want to be informed, and so I think the challenge is, how do you take big food, big companies, and make them feel small? And how do you take small companies and make sure they don't get too big? I think that's a real balance in the future. So consumers are focused on health. They're focused on diets. They're focused on technology. We're talking about moving to a system of more closer to personalization versus industrialization. And I think that's a real element that we think about. If you're on, whatever Mediterranean, keto, paleo diet, you got a wearable watch, your genetic makeup, you know what, you're really a prime candidate to have a personalized food experience. And I think the other aspect on the consumer side is the generational differences. I mean, the way, baby boomers and Xers think about food, it was cheap, fast, local, get it to me, eat it in the car, or what have you. If you look at our Gen X or our Gen Zs and millennials, they have a very different approach to food. It's about experience. It's about status. Cars and houses don't show status for that generation. It's often about food and experience. It's curiosity of food, where they place value. So I think consumer driven is the is the big engine behind the future of the food system. Two other elements I'll hit quickly though. We've heard sustainability and planet friendly. I think planet friendly future is a must have, and I think about it in a couple ways. Jim talked about regenerative agriculture. Let's face it, we don't have a definition for regenerative agriculture today. It means different things to different people. Let's get a definition around it. Let's rally on it. Let's measure it and let's drive it. Consumers are asking farmers to do it. It's again, consumer driven. I think the other in sustainability, if you look at, we're going to see a food package on the shelf pretty soon that's going to have a label on the front that says this is sustainable. What's it mean to have a sustainable food product? Well, that means at that point you took responsibility for the packaging, the food inside, the distribution, the labor. You better have visibility and transparency all the way back through that system. So, we're going to see, different models, but again, sustainability at an enterprise level is different than sustainability at a product or a brand level, So I think you kind of differentiate between the two. And the last thing I say, I think we're going to have a highly connected system. Now, gosh darn, we have a highly connected system today. So what's different? Well, I think we got to ask ourselves going forward, who's adding value to the products, and what do consumers value? And if you're not adding value, I think you're at risk of being disintermediated, and your profit pool will shrink. So you got to always search for value. And the question is, where and how do consumers want food? We see direct to consumers. I can get an assortment of snacks, sent to my house, snacks that aren't available in where I live. So direct to consumer. I think subscription models. I think about ghost kitchens, dark stores, live stores, controlled environment agriculture. These things are disruptive forces down there. So I'll close with this. When you think about back to the farm, I think it's all about knowing where consumers are going, but I think about three different producers. I think about row crops, I think about specialty crops, and I think about protein, and in the row crops world, I think about scale and efficiency. And especially I think about local, fresh, and controlled environment. In the protein world, I think about similar challenges as big row crops, but now you also got this thing called alternative proteins. Is it a friend or a foe? And I think that's kind of something to think about if you're in that sector. So future is unpredictable, and as a consultant, I can say it depends. But it definitely is an exciting next decade at least.
All right, thank you. Jim Flatt, go from your perspective.
Yeah, so I'd like to actually pull more on that thread. I think you've heard very well from many fellow panelists on the future of agriculture. And of course, when I think about this, the purpose of our agriculture system is to meet the consumer need for food. But I see three major trends, and this is both in the data we have seen and past experience. And so they are really as follows. First, in the next 20 years, we're going to see a strong movement towards food as health. Sustainability was called out, and I'll go into that a little bit more. And then finally, a plant-based focus. And I think, as Rob was alluding to, there certainly is I would even say pan-generational changes in the attitudes and values of consumers. When I think many of us were growing up, food was sustenance, and you worried about just having enough, putting food on the dinner plate. But increasingly now, where through modern ag, we for most of the world, not all, we've alleviated that really basic primal fear, and so now the consumer values have shifted to other things, which is more about quality of the food they eat, the experience, and the sustainability. When we were working on plant-based foods, egg and meat replacements, I was really shocked by some of the primary consumer research that was showing how important sustainability was in the people who are expressing interest in these products. So absolutely, people care about how the products are being produced and basically the carbon footprint, if you'll have it, that they're leaving on this world, and they're willing to pay a premium. I think according to the most recent research, almost 50% of consumers now will consider paying a premium for something that they perceive as better for the planet. And that's a big change over the last decade or two. Kind of going into the food as health aspect, I actually see that we're at the cusp of generational change here, where we have oftentimes thought about agriculture, food, and health as very separate things. We thought about food for sustenance. We thought about health only when we were sick or diseased, and then we'd go see a doctor or or get a prescription or go to the hospital for when we were sick and ailed. Many people are not thinking like that anymore. They're thinking about, how do I avoid what I see my mother or father or close friend or relative, where they see that they're suffering an impaired lifestyle, and largely that is because, frankly, imperfect or poor lifestyle choices. 70% of the $1.3 trillion we spend in the U.S. is for not curing, but just managing the worst effects of chronic disease. Most of the chronic disease is largely preventable. If you look at data from 50, 60 years ago, the incidence of chronic disease is double that, and it's not only literally killing us, but it is also draining precious dollars that we don't have to spend. And what's interesting is not only are the economists there, the need for change, but consumers are there as well. I think now, since COVID, 77% of US adults actually take dietary supplements or purchase functional foods. And those include things like probiotic fortified yogurts, DHA enriched milks, kombucha, you name it. These things are here to stay. I mean, think about that number. And so it's not just what people are saying, it's what people are doing. And our agriculture system is going to respond to that. And now, as I think has been well laid out, we actually, starting with Jim, we actually have some of the tools to do that. And so I do see major changes where, in fact, we do go to a greater variety of nutrient-dense foods. And so again, that's not only just from because they're better for us, but that's actually goes back to the point that Rob was making. That's a different experience. It creates a new story around our relationship for food that actually farmers can tell directly. We're going to see QR codes with information about how a particular avocado was grown, where it was grown, and who grew it. And there's a real opportunity to create a direct connection between the farmer and consumer, and fundamentally that's going to create more value for the farmer. And you already see this in wine and coffee and chocolate. And I think you're going to see those trends of specialization and kind of value-added crops much broader. I think just the final point I'll make is, when we look at this, we see though food as health is the biggest value creating opportunity that the food and agriculture system has today. If you think about it, most consumer packaged goods companies, farmers, we're struggling to see more than low single-digit top-line growth. If you think about it, the ability to capture money that we spend on healthcare back in the food system, where the science shows there's a causal relationship between what we eat and how we feel, that's a big opportunity. And I had the opportunity to serve on a congressional panel last week, and it was interesting hearing from the CEO of John Hancock, who have rolled out a national program now to basically subsidize purchase of healthy foods, because not only are they seeing healthier participants or insured, but they're actually making more money because of it. And you see pilot programs with Kaiser Permanente, Geisinger Health in Pennsylvania, and that's a sign of where things are going. And as foods that are really truly healthier for you actually prove out to lead to longer and healthier lives, that's going to then start the flow of dollars back to food and agriculture. And that's why I see that as a very powerful motivating force. So always go back to the fundamentals, the science, the economics, and consumer behaviors. And all three of those trends are pointing to those fundamentals are pointing to a very different food system over the next 20 to 50 years. And I really think it's going to be a golden era for the food and agriculture industry.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Jugveer. You're actually putting some of this food into people's mouths, right?
Yeah, and you know, I'm loving everything I'm hearing because it tells me that I'm not headed in the complete wrong direction in what I'm doing. I think that you know, I think Rob said it best, is that we are seeing a connection point now between agriculture and the end consumer that we've never seen before. And it's something, you know, 9 years ago, I met a company out of Japan who was putting small LTE, or at the time LTE connected cameras that were taking time-lapse pictures of a farmer's field. And it was funny when I looked at this, I said, no, it's not too interesting seeing tomatoes grow. But what they piled onto that was a social feed between the farmer and the consumer. And what was, you know, we piloted this in a farm in Montreal and at McGill University there, and the demand from students to know more about how they're helping the well-being of the farmer, the farm, and the planet was incredible. And you know, as you say, when we're on the verge of personalization, and that has to come on the platform of digitization, as Wade was saying, which was the connectivity. One of the biggest things that we struggle with at Compass, being we're probably on the largest of most distributors and most large food companies. We're probably one of their top 5 customers. I can say that safely. We need to provide traceability and transparency to the consumers that we serve. You know, we now are digitizing at a rate, you know, I will say to the organization, we went into the pandemic in 2020, we came out in 2025. Because we accelerated so much as far as our technology went. But what that's giving now consumers is, I want to understand when I go on my mobile app to order my lunch, where is that lunch coming from? What's the carbon footprint of that lunch? How is it packaged? You know, who grew it? How far did the food come from? And one of the interesting phenomenon, and I think Jim Flatt picked on, is that when even 10 years ago, it was portion size for the dollar price. It was how much am I getting for what I'm paying? And a lot of what we're being pressured now on is portioning, right? In a consumption economy where, you know, we deal with pricing reducing as we consume more, that's actually driving us away from how do you actually portion correctly and then price correctly, given all the pressures that we're facing. So when you go on these digital platforms now, we're connecting, you know, previously it would be a client that would tell us what they want on a menu and the price points, and we would design menus around that. I think one of the things we're seeing now is that the consumers are demanding a very different experience and different menu items and different nourishment than a client may want us to do. And then that's the complexity of a business like we're in, which is managed service. The second piece that's really, really coming to light is this food as healing. Insurance companies now are dinging hospitals for readmittance rates. They're starting to look at, when a patient leaves a hospital, if they are readmitted for the same condition, the insurance companies are starting to look at the responsibility on the hospital and their support services to create better futures for them after they leave the hospital. So things like, you know, connecting fresh produce with patients that leave. Can we ship them food? Can we ship them produce? Can we digitally monitor what they're eating? Can they get better instruction on how to cook better at home? Because, you know, even cooking, you know, when we look at cooking, the stat I heard was that only 12% of people under 35 now know actually how to cook more than 5 dishes. And therefore they're driving this food retail, but that food retail then is driving either positive or negative carbon change. So there's so many factors that are now going into this, but it's all pointing back to the one thing that I think Wade said and Rob said was, it's going to inform the farmers on exactly how and what they need to produce. And they're going to be able to get those insights from my end of things, which is, what are consumers looking at on a menu? What are they ordering? When are they ordering it? What are their reasons for ordering it? And a bit of what Rob said is, how do you give them a status out of it, right? So, celebrity chefs now that have made a name in cooking out of scraps, right? They take the core of a pineapple and make a great dish out of it. They take the leftovers of a salad and they make a great dish out of that. So that whole groundswell has created such a different consumer for us to cater to that is changing our business model. The other piece is on the purchasing side. I mean, we work with large distributors, and we are one step removed now from the farms. And what's happening for us is, just as much as the consumers are now demanding of us around our clients, we are demanding of our distributors to go around them directly to farms. So, policies that we're seeing from some of our clients is that 90% of the menu has to be sourced within 100 miles. Or that there's specific items that have to be bought from specific farms because they align to that company's values based on carbon. All of that is what we're seeing, where I think as we move towards the future, the farmer, ultimately, those in agriculture, are going to be the not the source of data, the repository. It's where we're going to be sending our data to educate the agriculture and farmer community, so that they can then produce in a way that we can meet the demands of the consumer. So that pull, as Rob said, is already happening. I mean, we serve higher ed. We have 325 higher ed institutions across the US, some of the biggest. They're all moving this way, and the students are demanding it. So I think there's so much going on. And I heard so much previously from everyone on the panel that I think we are, what to me is encouraging, is we are all singing from the same songbook. We are all looking at the same problems, even though we are at different spectrums in that entire supply chain. But ultimately, it is going to be the consumer and the farmer, and then everyone in between is going to try to connect so that we can create a better, stable future. And that's just the farming side. There's the packaging side. And I think one of the things that we're battling with is, on-demand delivery. What some of the models give us is, we can get our food waste down to 4% because it's so predictable. In an average kitchen, we're around 12, 13% if you're talking about everything. So that whole circular economy, planning, forecasting, using the data to say, at a given time, who will order what, and how can we only produce that, and how can we only purchase that, and how can we push that back through the supply chain? That's one of the things that we're really actively looking at, which is, if we can reduce the waste, if we can standardize what we make in a standardized recipe, we can reduce the waste in a kitchen, we can then start impacting the whole chain behind it. So it's a really interesting time, because you have this model that was built on consumption drives lower pricing, greater value. And then you have this personalization, which is almost the opposite of volume, and driving from a totally, you're changing the lanes, you're changing the way the road's going now, trying to create a better, positive future for the planet and everyone.
All right, thank you. And Mike, I left you for last year because you look at everything across the entire spectrum, so you can fill in the blanks for us, Mike. What part of the future have we not talked about?
Well, when I think about food and agriculture in 5 to 10 years, I'm expecting major change because of multiple simultaneous technology shifts and breakthroughs. And agriculture and has enjoyed several technology shifts in the course of my career, but for the most part, each of those had a window where they were able to be the focus kind of somewhat by themselves. Well, now we're really expecting the following technology breakthroughs to have a major positive impact on both agriculture and food. And I'll highlight them first, and then I'll expand on them a bit. So first, digitation, data integration, and data analytics. Now I put those together because they're connected, they're related, but that's number one. The next one is electrification, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Again, connected, interdependent, I put them together. Third, genetic modification. Fourth, alternate proteins. And fifth, next generation biologicals. And if I briefly expand on each of them, I think about digitization, data integration, data analytics. I'm expecting ag to catch up with consumer goods during this period of time. Precision and decision ag are going to become hyper precision. We'll use data analytics are going to enable us to use all those layers of data that we've been collecting, down to sub-acre and sometimes plant level to produce high impact, beyond intuitive recommendations. I'm excited about the prospects there. The second one, electrification, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Robots are going to become common in production agriculture. They will replace a sizable portion of human labor, particularly for crop thinning and harvesting and fruit and veg crops. We also anticipate that they'll enable mid and small size equipment to do the work with less compaction and in more soil conditions, in particularly the broadacre crops. Picture smaller, lighter, electrically powered equipment that can be deployed in multiples. The other thing I'd say is that artificial intelligence here is also going to enable more valuable data analytics. So there's a connection to the first item I mentioned. My third item is genetic modification. And I've got gene editing first because I think that's going to have just a huge potential impact. And it's already having an impact, and it's poised to vault to new levels. Think about some of the examples already in the market. SU canola, high oleic soybeans, high GABA tomatoes. We've got pigs protected from PRRS. So there's already some things, and that's just a tiny, tiny fraction of what's possible. Genetic modification and transgenes, we'll see more there. The first food is on the market now, Aqua Advantage salmon. And then I want to call out RNA interference, messenger RNA. That's a whole area of genetic modification that's going to transform a lot of the tools available. My fourth item was alternate proteins. And I mean, both plant-based and tissue culture are going to be available in that period of time. They'll be competitive, and I do believe they'll capture a share of the market. I believe they, at least in the next 10 years, they're going to supplement, not replace animal protein. In fact, I don't think long-term they'll replace it, but that's a whole nother story. And then this fifth area, next-gen biologicals, they're going to become mainstream in production agriculture. And I'm thinking about products for pest, the pest control, biocontrol products that have performance that's literally competitive with synthetics currently. And that's going to be a function of much better discovery and optimization technology, platforms that just they're a light year ahead of what they used to be. And also RNA approaches are going to make a difference here with those tools. And then you've got the products for plant health and stimulation, fertilizer use efficiency, soil health, water use efficiency. We generally categorize them as biostimulants, one form or another, but we're going to see some very efficacious, very significant products there. So in short, I see agriculture is poised for a very exciting decade. Producers are going to have more and more powerful tools, and consumers are going to have more and healthier and tastier choices. I feel like the way I'm looking at this overlaps with a lot of what's already been said, but maybe was a little different take on it. So I appreciate your hearing me out. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. We're going to go take some questions from the audience here, and we don't have a lot of time, so let's try to be a little concise on and such. But one of the things that has been mentioned, but maybe not, it might explore just a little further. A lot of the conversation's been about crops and grains and so forth, and plants. what about the animal proteins, and how it affects them both raising for animal farming, but also the, any contrarian views on the synthetic proteins, whether they really are going to be huge or they're just a supplement, as Mike might have said. So who might want to take that one on? Jim?
Yeah, Paul, be happy to. So yeah, having spent a lot of my time developing those kind of products, it's really important to know what the technologies can and can't do. And so as you look at basically plant-based approaches to provide mimetics for, basically the same experiences that we have with animal-based or muscle meats, I still think that's far and away going to be the predominant approach. And there's certainly some methods and technologies that can be employed to basically upvalue what we're producing on the farm. And we already know that there are interesting proteins that plants produce that actually can provide some of those functions. And if you think about it, we already have that scaled infrastructure in place. You do see a lot of investment going into what's now called precision fermentation, basically, recombinant protein productions. But if you look at all but the biggest commodity enzymes, you're still looking at production costs, over $100 a kilogram. And the reality is, that's a price point that's way up over what we actually have, right, for that we're willing to pay for those types of products. So you're going to see more recombinant proteins in the food system, but they're going to be used at pretty low use levels, and that's why I think those, it's just fundamentally really basic economics that's going to limit the precision fermentations for really broad scale replacements. But again, we should see them entering, at least more foods for a range of specialty properties. And then, related, you do see a lot around cultured meat, or basically using mammalian cell culture techniques to produce, the actual tissues. And again, while a lot of improvements have been made, you're fundamentally looking at things that have only been commercially viable for pharmaceutical production. If you've ever been through a cell culture plant and look at the cost that goes into maintaining an aseptic system, because basically mammalian cells are the least competitive thing on the planet in an open culture system. It's very, very expensive. And if you look at the calculation of capital costs to actually replace meat, I just don't see how that ever pencils out. So I think a lot of the approaches, though, to use microbes for example, as probiotics for cows, for example, to reduce, methane emissions. There are a lot of techniques here that can improve the sustainability of our current production system. And as I said, I think agriculture has a huge role to play through applying new technologies to basically upgrade what we already produce. And I think that's actually going to have a much greater impact on replacing animal-based foods. But that is a consumer trend that is clearly continuing. So expect it to happen.
All right, thank you. Jim, you got a contrarian view, Jim Collins?
Maybe not a contrarian view, but maybe it's more of a perspective on where. I view the replacement of meat through some of the technologies that Jim just talked about as a trend. It is consumer driven, but it is clearly a North America, European type of demand pull. And I think as we think about the demand for animal protein, I think we always have to put a global view of that, because just as we're maybe seeing more plant-based proteins in Europe and North America, the demand for animal protein in Africa and in Asia The demand for chicken alone in India is just staggering, and then you add Latin America to that. So I would say the time frame that you're talking about will see the emergence of those technologies, but would they take a meaningful chunk out of global animal protein production? I just don't see it in that kind of time horizon because of these two demand curves, one decreasing and one really taking off. So I would just add that perspective.
Let's go to another topic somebody brought up, which was the automation and mechanization and basically versus labor. Global labor is certainly a challenge these days. Who has a perspective on whether it's the pace of change or how that all plays out?
Well, I can maybe speak from a farmer perspective, I guess, on a large scale row crop farm. I mean, if you look at Western Canada or the Northern Plains, you have really large farms that have to plant spray and harvest in a very, very narrow window. And so, and generally what people don't realize, these are family farms and they might farm 30,000 acres and there could be 5 connected family members and have 4 or 5 hired people. But their focus of how they build their farming operations is around labor. The size of the tractor, the size of the air seeder, the size of the trucks that haul the grain, like everything is about efficiency and scale, do more with less, do more with less. Suddenly now you start to put autonomous into the mix and it sort of changes that view all of a sudden, that suddenly now when it comes to, and depending on the term, whether it's a chaser wagon or a grain cart or depending on what part of the world you live in, that that suddenly that piece of equipment becomes autonomous. Or when you go out to a big farm in southern Alberta or Montana where it's 1,000-acre farm and you put there's nobody driving the tractor and suddenly and there's no risk of that. I actually think that autonomous agriculture will come faster and more mainstream than what you'll see autonomous vehicles in an urban setting, because it's super practical and farmers, as much as they'd like to be connected, because most of those folks, even on those really big farms, the managers, the owner, their butts are in a tractor. They're doing the work alongside those hired men or hired people. But the idea of suddenly, they're also very practical thinking. And if you can put a robot in the tractor to do as good a job and they can do something else, they'll do it. So I think that's coming. I think, to Mike's point though, you may not need, a 90-foot air seeder anymore. Maybe you're going to need 5 30-foot air seeders that go day and night. And because with scale and efficiency comes some agronomic issues with, compaction and things like that. And so I think that's a huge trend that's going to come. And I think when it comes, it's going to come fast. And one thing I know about farmers, when they see somebody across the road doing something that looks a little better than them, they adopt pretty quick. And because there's Jackie said that they are the nicest people in the world, but they are the most competitive. And if somebody is getting ahead of them, they're going to adopt and act quickly. So,
all right, thank you, Jugbear.
Yeah, not on the farming side, but we're definitely seeing a lot of automation on the production side. The advantage for us, obviously, we have a lot of operational labor in our units that are cranking out cooking recipes, serving customers. And, I think there's a profile change in the type of career that many of them want. There's the Amazon pressure, that will, we see it directly when Amazon opens up a fulfillment center near one of our units. We see differences in who wants to do what. The advantage though in automation, we're seeing companies that are producing now robots or production robots that are able to standardize dishes, produce what 3 people would do with one robot with one technician, right? And calling it a technician. So there's a lot of automation, and what that yields is standardization, therefore precision, I think, as Jim said at the beginning of the call, and it also yields a smaller footprint in what we do. and lower energy and all of that. So I think there's two spectrums. You know, you have a more efficient farmer, you also have a more efficient operation. But I think that the theme through it, what automation and digitization does, is it standardizes and makes everything 100% repeatable along the same parameters. And that's something in a very organic, human-based business now that we're able to do that we weren't able to do before, that I think is going to yield really good results as we go. That we're going to have value add positions, experiential positions. You're going to have like farmers doing the right things, doing thinking, doing planning, doing forecasting, truly running it like a business, while the operational aspects get automated. And I think that's something that has to happen for us to be able to advance this whole agenda.
All right. Mike, you got a different perspective?
Well, I'd like to focus it just a little bit, and the focus in my mind is that the labor shortage is most felt in North America, or actually the U.S. and Southern Europe. It's not nearly the factor in Mexico or Africa or Asia. The other thing I would say is that where it's most acutely felt is in specialty crops, the tree, fruit, nut, vine, veg, and also the pork and chicken production industries. That's where it's most acute. Now, I'm not trying to minimize that getting people by retailers for running running equipment, et cetera, isn't a problem. It is, but the situation is really most acute for seasonal workers in this tree, fruit, nut, vine, veg industry. And that's true in the US, it's true in Southern Europe. And so there's just a huge demand for trying to offset as much of that as possible. And the operations that they need it most for are harvest. That's the biggest thing.
Okay, thank you. I would like to move on different topic, but Jackie, did you have a different perspective?
Yeah, no, I think also what Mike said about fruit and veg, I think that's really where the greatest opportunity is. Although, you've seen the evolution, and especially with robotics and machine and AI learning, it's very impressive. But I just also wanted to say, to kind of fundamentally build, you also see it in the industry, and things like digitalization of pest management and production units, and also in food handling operations and things. So, I just want to stress that I think across the value chain, you're really seeing, robotics and all these type of elements coming across the value chain. Just to give also a non-crop perspective, because there's a lot going on there.
Yep. All right, for probably a time for one last question or area of, and I'd like to go back to certainly one of the common ingredients in food and agriculture and virtually every other industry I get to observe is really something so many of you mentioned it, is the consumer pull and consumer driven, and they're actually directing traffic and expectations, transparency, sustainability, health, and all sorts of things. And it's also, in my observations, decommoditized. Ag was certainly, when I was growing up, the commodity exchanges was, corn, wheat, barley, and now it seems everything's, you can order branded almost anything. So who would like to take on just a little bit more of how that's going to flesh out the connectivity, the personalization, customization, where's all that go, and how, is that really totally healthy for the planet, for the global developing countries and such, or is it just good for consumers who can afford it?
I'll maybe just quickly jump in. I really think that this is going to change fundamental agriculture around connectivity from a grower's perspective. I mean, the information that they can collect, and they can do it on scale now. Pretty much every piece of equipment from, I'll call it from 2003 on, has the ability to collect data and push data into a cloud. When it comes to connectivity, there isn't a place, like, we complain about the connectivity in certain areas of North America, but there really isn't a spot that you can't actually get it for a grower. So I think that the interesting part again is the ability for the farm to have that relationship and be able to provide this real-time information from the farm directly to a processor, or right directly to a grocer, or right directly to that consumer. It's never been done. And that's the big disruption, right? That's the big change. How are farmers going to buy products? How are they going to sell products? How are they going to connect to the consumer? That's not an if, it's just a matter of a when.
Rob?
Yeah, this is clearly a big passion area for me, right? But I mean, first off, I think the future of the food industry is going to land in a place that looks awful familiar. Okay. And what I mean by that is, ultimately consumers want to know who produces their food, and consumers want to engage with food differently. Okay. That's not that unique. It's not the first time we've seen that in our lives. I mean, we used to have a butcher on one corner, we had a florist on the other. For Pete's sake, we had milk delivered to our house. So home delivery is nothing new, right? And so that all looks familiar, but the way consumers used to know producers was a physical relationship. In the future, it's going to be a digital relationship. It's going to be through data. It's going to be through metaverse. It's going to be through lots of these other things. I think ultimately the challenge in the production side of the system is that innovation in many cases happens once a year. It's a cycle. Let me try something new, see what happens. I'll try it again next year. If you go to the other end of the food system, innovation is happening weekly, daily, hourly. Let me try a new food. I get immediate feedback. Let me try a new distribution system, immediate feedback. If you think about the future of just QSRs, quick serve restaurants as an example, how many kitchens do we actually need? Can you envision a world where you have one kitchen that produces all fast food out of it? Is the real value of that experience the kitchen itself, or is it the food that's produced and how it's produced and the visibility into it? So I think the consumer will continue to drive really, really hard and vote with their wallets. But I think we're going to see a system that should look a lot, pretty familiar to what, I'll say us old folks have seen before.
Any other last and concise comments? Jim Collins?
I'll add a thought. I was going to weigh in on the mechanization, the automation question previously, as well as this one. I just, for everybody who's here, not just the panelists, but the folks that are going to go think about the future of ag here in a little bit. We always have to remember to put that global view, right? Last I heard, there are 100,000 farmers that could probably afford the kind of automation equipment that we're talking about. There are 1 billion farmers around the world that farm less than 1/2 of an acre worth of land, and a big chunk of those are farming less than 1/4 of an acre. So, automation will help. I think I totally agree with the crops and the geographic, but over time, thinking about simpler ways and more direct ways, the use of data totally different, right? A farmer in Africa, their greatest need is agronomic information, and how we can automate getting that data in their hands so they can just be a better farmer on that 1/2 an acre is going to be important. And the same goes for this final piece. There's still a bunch of consumers out there who around the world, especially in Asia and in Africa, whose demand is quantity right now, still is sustenance. And it'll be a longer period of time before we see that quality and healthy connectivity. It needs to happen. It will come, but we're going to see this thing unfold in two waves: a developed market wave and then a more global market wave. So I'll just add that thought.
Yeah, Jim, I think that's a great comment, because you're absolutely right. The necessity of the developed versus the developing markets, and that value, as you said, of that smallholder farmer and what they need and how they feed their local communities. It's absolutely a fantastic point. There is a definite difference there, and we from a global view, working in agriculture, have to keep that in mind, because it's really about going back to, feeding the world and tying to Jim's point about health and the importance of food makes, a healthy society.
Yep. All right. Well, that brings us to an end of the panel conversation. I can't help but think that I'll reflect back on my own single market data point of my own life, but the biggest effect and transformation of COVID was that the fact of my wife of 45 years all of a sudden became a great cook, and it's transformed our household. So please join me in the those of you in the audience in thanking each of our panelists, Jackie Applegate, Wade Barnes, Mike Burrell, Jim Collins, Rob Dungoski, Jim Flatt, and Jugveer Randhawa for coming today, taking time out, sharing your observations. What's happening in food and agriculture is just just so consistent with what's happening in every single part of our lives and our work. It is amazing to be alive today to see how the world's transforming, and hopefully, I think as Jackie said, if we can come together as a world and collaborate and learn from each other, we will be at a better spot in the future.